Hello and welcome to Open Line. I'm Starlene Stringer. We all work so hard to earn our money, so no one wants to be ripped off or cheated out of cash. Today we have tips to protect yourself from financial crimes. Our guest is Irving Police Officer James McLellan, and we want to thank him so much for being here. We really appreciate you taking time to come and talk to us about this.
Sure, well, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. You know, we're going to start with something that a lot of people have dealt with lately, and that's identity theft. Can you kind of give us the basics about it? I mean, when we talk about identity theft, what exactly do they mean? What's the specifics when it comes to it?
Right, well, that's just kind of a generic term. I mean, identity fraud is probably a more appropriate term, but basically the misuse of your personal identifying information. And that could be anything from your name, your date of birth, social security number, or other information like your bank account number, credit card number, any piece of information that personally identifies you to somebody who would use that to commit fraud. And whether that's employment fraud, tax refund fraud, or just opening up accounts in your name, charge accounts, or taking over your bank account, it's kind of just a term for all of that type of fraud that gets committed using your information.
I see. And so like I said, a lot of people seem to be dealing with it lately. So actually, how common is it?
Well, it's a big problem. It certainly has grown a lot in the last several years. It's a white-collar crime, and so typically those cases are not as dealt with in as harsh a manner at the prosecution level and as a murder, a rape, or something like that. And so it's relatively low risk, and a lot of people are falling victim to it these days, and it seems to be getting worse and worse.
That's really sad. So how do most people even find out that they're a victim? Is it through credit card statements or some other way?
Well, right, and typically they find out after it's too late that something has already happened, and they'll receive a notice in the mail that an account's been opened in their name, or they have some checks that were passed that bounced and somebody's trying to collect on them. So it's usually after the fact. Now, some folks are alerted to it just ahead of time if they have some type of credit monitoring or some service that monitors their credit for them, but again, it's usually when the damage has already been done.
Oh boy. So when you do find out you're a victim, if you're a victim, which we hope that our viewers are not, but if they do become a victim, so what do? Do you call the police, federal authorities, your credit card company? What's the first step?
All of that, really. Probably one of the first things that someone should do is, if they find out they've been the victim of identity theft, they should call that person or that company that is giving notice to them, and immediately start disputing those accounts, or shutting the credit cards down if that's what it involves, or just immediately make some type of dispute with the company or the business, and then as soon as possible after that, then make a report to law enforcement. Many of these organizations won't act unless the victim has filed a report, so that needs to be one of the early things that they do.
Now, you think it would seem like common sense that, okay, you know, this just happened to me, it's theft, so I'm going to contact the police, but a lot of people don't, and sometimes it's just out of embarrassment. But how important is it for people to actually contact you?
Well, again, it's very important, because without being able to provide a police report number or to state that they did call police and have a report initiated and perhaps an investigation started, then a lot of these companies are just not going to accept their word that this is a fraud matter. Oftentimes companies are very skeptical and think it may be an attempt to just avoid a legitimate debt, but once that police report's been made, then they feel more comfortable about disputing that account. So whether it's a fear of embarrassment or even a feeling of that it would be pointless to report it because nothing can be done, that should all be put aside, and a report should be made immediately.
Got it. So we've really focused on what happens once you do become a victim. But how do we prevent ourselves from becoming a victim? What can you do to protect yourself from identity theft?
Right. So there are a few things that you can do to minimize your risk. I mean, it's important to note that you may be able to do everything that you possibly can and still become a victim, just because your personal information is something that you have to handle on a daily basis. You deal with, you have to give it out. I mean, whether you go to the bank or the doctor's office, or you're giving that information out, and it may be stolen from you in a manner which you have no control over. So, but some of the things that you can do, I mean, you could monitor your credit regularly. That's important to know, and you can find out much sooner if an account has been established in your name, rather than waiting for the account to go delinquent and then receiving that notification. Much of this you can do with no cost. There is a website out there, annualcreditreport.com, and that's a place you can go to and get a credit report for free every year. Or there are other paid services that you can use, LifeLock and some other companies that will, for a fee, will just do all that legwork for you, but they will continuously monitor your accounts and notify you of any unusual activity. And so those are some things you can do on the front end. Also monitoring bank statements, monitoring credit card statements, things like that for any fraud activity. Those are some things that you can do on a regular basis to catch something early.
Thank you for that advice. Great information. And then something that's especially heartbreaking to me is when the elderly are targeted, but it happens all too often. So can you tell us about some of the common scams you see that are happening to older people?
Right. So those, and that takes on the form of a lot of confidence games and swindles and things like that. You know, we see elderly folks that get scammed on by phone. Somebody will call them and they'll claim to be even a distant family member, that they're stuck out of the country, or maybe they got arrested and they need to be bonded out of jail, and somebody will gain their confidence and they'll think that maybe one of their loved ones is in trouble, and so then they follow the person's instructions to send money somewhere, or it may be somebody approaching them in person with a hardship story and they need some help, or even coming by their house and saying that they've noticed cracks in their driveway or problems with the roof, and pull some kind of a scam to supposedly repair some damage. And so in those cases that's a little bit more difficult because again, those sometimes the elderly are less keen on when they've been scammed, and sometimes it takes a family member hearing about a story, you know, like that after the fact, that they've been taken. So, my advice to anyone, but particularly the elderly, would be that if they receive a phone call or a knock on the door, or if they're even approached at a parking lot, then they need to just be wary of somebody trying to gain their confidence and get them to do something, especially when it involves money, going to a bank and depositing a check for someone, or withdrawing money for some reason. Just stop and think it through, and just they should tell people that they're not interested, and if they feel scared or threatened, that they should call the police or a family member, and don't make a decision without consulting someone else first.
Good advice. And I understand that there's another crime that's been seen here in Irving lately, and it's called skimming. Can you explain exactly what that is?
Right. So skimming is essentially the act of typically stealing credit card or debit card information, and it can be a low-tech form of skimming where maybe somebody just takes a picture of a credit card number or writes down a credit card number and uses that for fraud purposes. But it can go up to a high-tech circumstance where these thieves and fraudsters will put devices on gas pumps or at point-of-sale terminals and collect the information electronically, and then use that information to either make withdrawals out of bank accounts or to make purchases online, things like that. So it's simply the act of capturing credit and debit card information and then again using it to commit fraud.
Now, is there something we can look for when it comes to skimming as far as the gas pumps or ATM machines? Will there be something that sticks out or we should pay attention for if we are using our card there?
Sure. So a lot of the gas pumps will have the security tape over the door, and so people should look for any broken tape or broken security seal or any other kind of evidence that the machine has been tampered with. The same for ATMs. If there's any evidence of any type of damage or tampering, then not to use it and report it to the business. If possible, use credit cards at the point of sale, or use the debit card as a credit card. There's an option where you can use it as debit or credit, but at least by pressing the credit option, you're not prompted then to put in a PIN. And oftentimes with these gas pump skimming cases, we see that the thieves are primarily after the debit card numbers with a PIN, because then they can just recreate a debit card and they can just take that straight to an ATM and make cash withdrawals, instead of having to go through buying product and then reselling it or what have you. So those are a couple things that can be done. And also if somebody is skimmed, then instead of the money coming straight out of the the account holder's account, then that simply goes onto a credit card statement, and that's something that can be disputed without any money actually leaving your account.
Oh, wow. And so what other kind of credit card scams are you seeing when it comes to debit cards and credit cards? What other kind of scams are people doing these days?
There's the good old-fashioned just theft of cards, if you will. I mean, people losing their wallets or purses, or car break-ins or other thefts like that, where people are stealing cards and then using them quickly before the victim is aware of it. But we see a lot of online fraud. It's much more risky to walk into a store and use a card, especially if any time has elapsed between the theft of the card and the use of the card. Then there's an increased risk as time goes on of that card being shut down and somebody in a store being apprehended because the card has been reported stolen and the business is calling the police. The lower risk is to use it online, buy products, especially electronics, phones, things like that, and then have them shipped somewhere, and then they're either resold or traded for whatever the fraudster is after.
Wow, I'm glad you brought up online shopping with that, because something else that's concerning these days is, like, if you're buying something, say, on Craigslist, and you're going to go out and meet someone. What do we need to keep in mind? What are the steps we should take before meeting the person in person?
Right. Well, obviously, when you meet somebody, then you're taking a chance. You're meeting up with somebody that you don't know, and there's always the potential there that it may be a setup, that you may be the target of a robbery for either the item that you're selling or maybe the cash that you bring to the exchange if you're trying to buy something. Then that just takes on an element of risk. Now, there are a lot of, and a majority of the transactions that occur like that. If you're buying or selling something on Craigslist or some of these sites, the majority of those transactions are legitimate people that are trying to conduct legitimate business, but you're still taking a risk. So I would suggest that people would consider what they're buying or what they're selling. I mean, and if they're buying something, is the price too good to be true? Mm-hmm. Is it much lower than the average price of what the item is selling for? In that case, that's definitely a red flag. Deal in a public place, either go to a restaurant or go to, for example, the police department. We have what's called the exchange zone, and that's a parking lot or a space in the parking lot that's marked out specifically for these types of transactions. It's in front of the police station, it's under continuous video surveillance, and it's a place that people should feel comfortable and safe to do something like that. If they don't want to use a place like that, then again, a public restaurant, a fast food restaurant. And bring someone with you. I mean, you probably shouldn't do something like that alone. Probably not a good idea to have somebody come to your house unless it's just absolutely necessary. But you just don't want to find yourself the victim of a robbery or some other crime just on a simple transaction like that.
Definitely not. And we were taking a look at some video showing that exchange zone that you have there in front of the police department. And it's great that you do have that available, because so many horrible stories just stick out of people selling things and things going wrong and just really bad things. So it's nice to know that the police department has that there. There are a lot of crime prevention tips also on your website. Let's go through some of the topics that are covered. One is false charities. Tell us about that.
Right. Well, and we see that a lot, and especially where the fraudsters will get on the phone and they will try to solicit money all in the name of a charity. And even in light of things that have happened recently, people will even pose as charity workers trying to collect on behalf of police organizations and for law enforcement officers that are killed in the line of duty, things like that. And they'll get on the phone or online, and they'll try and solicit in the name of a charity. And unfortunately, a lot of people will fall for those because they think that they're doing some good and they're contributing to a worthwhile cause. And so folks should be wary about just giving money to someone just on a phone call. They should always verify that they are in fact giving to a legitimate organization and that they're giving to a legitimate cause. And so one thing that I would encourage people to do is to just have the confidence to say no, or to say, I'll call you back, and either I'll give through your website, or I'll give it an office or a location that they know that they're giving to a legitimate person. And so it's a shame when a well-meaning charity and their name is used to victimize others and take money that would otherwise go to that business.
That is horrible. Well, another thing I want you to touch on a bit is something called the obituary column sting. Can you tell us what exactly that means?
Well, unfortunately, criminals in the past have used the obituary column. It may be less prevalent now that there's not as much emphasis on the print media and the obituaries. It seems to be a trend that seems to be going down. But criminals will look at the obituary and they will look and see that somebody's passed away, and they will see, for example, when a service is going to be held or when a memorial is going to be held, and they'll use that to maybe go to someone's home and commit a burglary or a theft because they have a high degree of confidence that nobody's going to be home at that time. You know, on a similar strain when it comes to scams and financial fraud is someone might use somebody's grief against them, and they may call up posing as a friend or a family member or even someone, a bill collector that's trying to collect money from an account that was held by the deceased, and they're again taking advantage of people in an emotional state and perhaps convincing them to give them money or give them something under the premise of a legitimate reason, but ultimately it's a scam, and it's just a criminal that's trying to capitalize on the situation. That's
so sad. Well, let's switch away a little bit from talking about the financial situations that people are facing these days when it comes to crime, but spring is fast approaching, and here on North Texas, oftentimes we'll have roof damage or something else, window damage caused by hail, whatever it may be, and that's where you're seeing other crime as well, because when it comes to getting home improvements done, there are scammers out there for that too, people just standing by trying to rip people off. So what do you tell people about that? There are honest contractors out there, but what do you look for to tell the difference in the good and the bad?
Right. Well, again, and it kind of goes back to some basic common sense. And there are a lot of people that after storms come through, you'll see these fly-by-night companies or people that will go troll neighborhoods and look and offer work to be done in the house, or maybe they were in the neighborhood for someone else and want to come by and try and solicit some type of business. Do your due diligence and know who you're getting into a contract with or doing business with. Vet these companies or these people. Don't be high pressured into accepting an agreement to have some work done or some repair done. Time is on your side, and I would encourage anybody that would ever be in a position where they need a contractor or somebody to do some work on their house, get bids. It's a good practice, regardless of whether, even if they're just looking, they're going out and they know they're soliciting from companies that are legitimate. Get multiple bids, and that way you're going to get the best price, and you're going to deal with legitimate businesses. So rather than somebody coming to you, then you want to be in a position where you're going to them to solicit their business, and vet them. Look them up online. Use resources like the Better Business Bureau or the Chamber of Commerce, and don't be rushed into a decision, because that's often when the people are taken advantage of, is when they just don't stop to think, and then they look back later and realize they made a quick decision.
Well, before we even get to spring storms, we have another holiday approaching. I know some guys are like, what holiday? Well, I'm talking about Valentine's Day, and you may order some packages and have them delivered to your house. And I know over the Christmas holiday, we heard a lot about package thefts. So what is the best way to protect things that we have sent to our homes?
Right, and as you alluded to, especially over the Christmas period, that is definitely a rising trend all over, and the thieves are taking advantage of packages just left on doorsteps, and typically the resident is gone all day. And we've even seen cases where these thieves are following these UPS trucks and other trucks around the neighborhood, and as soon as they make their delivery and make the corner, then the thieves are running up onto a porch and stealing packages. So there are a few things to keep in mind. Certainly, if at all possible, require a signature, so that you have to be home to accept the package, or you may even elect to have it left at the carrier. There's some offices in Irving here where people can actually go sign for their package at the shipper, and so that's an option. Another option that's gaining popularity are lockers. There are drop-off lockers that are established by some of the carriers. They're all over town, and when you're ordering a product, you can have it shipped to a locker instead, and that way it's secure, and you can just have to go up to the machine, and you can scan in your code, and then it will unlock the locker, and you collect your package. So it's left secured until you're ready for it. If you absolutely have to leave it on your porch, then just try and if you can, select a delivery window when you're going to be home, or at least close to when you're going to be home. If not, perhaps have it delivered to a neighbor that maybe is home during the day, and if at all possible, just avoid having it left on the porch. If there's just no other option, perhaps see if the carrier or if the shipper will, if you can provide specific delivery instructions, perhaps leaving it in a certain place or behind a bush or something behind a hedge on the porch, whatever it might be. Those are a few things you can do to potentially minimize having your packages stolen from your porch.
Wonderful. And I understand the Irving Police Department also has some resources to help with crime prevention. Can you tell me about the other resources?
Sure. So beginning with our website, we have a lot of information on our website, irvingpd.com, and then just navigate your way to the crime prevention page. There's a lot of information there about a lot of different types of crime, whether it's auto theft, financial fraud, scams, things like that. That's a good starting place. Of course, there are a lot of resources online for such things. There are other things that we can provide, such as security surveys. We have crime prevention officers that can come out to a person's home, can walk around their house and do an inspection, and can give advice on how to strengthen your home and how to better protect yourself, and whether it's using a particular kind of screw set for deadbolts or using window locks or trimming bushes, lighting, things like that. So that's something that is of no charge. Somebody would just have to call and schedule that, and that's something that we can provide. Or if folks just have questions, they can certainly call the police department or talk to an officer and pose their question that way, and officers would be happy to help them as best they can.
Wonderful. And I know Irving also has a lot of active neighborhood associations. How important can they be in helping prevent crime too?
Very important. Of course, most crimes are reported to us by someone else. I mean, we don't often just stumble across the crime in progress ourselves, certainly not when it comes to things like home burglaries and auto thefts, things like that. I mean, it does happen, but most of the time it's because somebody called it in. And so the more alert that neighbors can be, and the better that they know each other, then the more cooperative they're going to be. And so the neighborhood associations and crime watch groups are very important, and we do participate in those ourselves. We help neighborhoods get going on a crime watch neighborhood. We come out to meetings. If they request us at a meeting, we'll come out and we'll give them advice on some different things, and we'll help that organization. So it's very, very important for neighbors to be able to communicate with each other and know each other, because they're the ones that are probably going to be seeing something out of the ordinary and calling it into us.
You know, a new way neighbors are communicating with each other is through an application that's online through a website called Nextdoor. I love using it, but can you tell everyone about it, because not everyone's familiar with it?
Right. So Nextdoor is a really great resource. My wife uses it herself, and I know a lot of people in the city of Irving do. It's basically a closed neighborhood talk group. And it's designed for neighbors to be able to connect with each other, communicate with each other, and whether it's on issues of crime and safety, or whether it's for advice on a service that someone needs. Perhaps somebody is new to the area and wants to get on and pose the question about, do they know a good doctor in the neighborhood or a good babysitter? A resource that basically a community message board that people can get onto and talk about. And the neighborhoods are mapped out by Nextdoor, and so it's not open to the neighborhood group that you're part of is just specifically your neighborhood. It's not the entire city, and so it's a fairly closed group. And the police department has a presence on Nextdoor. It's one of our social media sites, and the police department, we can contribute items into Nextdoor. We can push out crime and safety information, or if we want to post crime prevention information to residents, or we can alert them to some emerging crime trends in the neighborhood. We can say that we've taken a certain number of reports in the neighborhood for, say, car break-ins, and ask people to be vigilant for car break-ins or strangers in the neighborhood. But the nice thing for the residents is that they know we're not privy to the other discussions that are going on. As far as the police department goes, it's a one-way street. We can just put into it, but we don't see everything else that's going on in that discussion group, so it's not a big brother type situation. People can communicate back to us. If we make a post, they can ask questions and we can respond follow-up, but it's just a great way for neighbors to be able to communicate, and we've had tremendous success with it as the police department. I know that personally we've had success with it, with discussions and some things going on in the neighborhood that we wanted to be aware of and contribute to, and so there's no charge. The only requirement when you sign up for it is that they'll either send you some type of card in the mail, or they'll have a verification process to make sure that you actually live in that neighborhood to then be part of that particular discussion group. But once you're past that, then you're in, and you can communicate with everyone accordingly.
Wonderful. Like you, I love Nextdoor, but there are going to be people, no matter how much we say how great it is, that are not going to go online. They're not going to go to the website. They're not going to sign up for Nextdoor. But the good news is you have other community outreach programs like Coffee with a Cop. Tell us about that for those who are interested in meeting you one-on-one.
Sure. Well, we started doing Coffee with a Cop a few years ago, and it's a program where that the officers will go out to a certain location on a certain day, and they'll be hosted by a particular a fast food restaurant, and the officers will be there for a couple hours, and residents can come by and they can talk with officers that will show up to this, and it's basically just having a cup of coffee with the officers of the police department. They can bring their concerns, and we don't go into it with any agendas and trying to push anything. We just want to be available to meet people, greet people, help answer any questions, or help address any concerns that they might have. And it's just it's a low pressure environment where we're not meeting people. We're not in a hurry to have to answer the next call, or we're in a confrontational situation. We can just meet people and get to know people, because really if people feel more comfortable around us, and we can feel comfortable around the community, then I think that creates a much better dialogue for people to be able to have a free flow of ideas and discussions. And so it really is a neat thing where we just basically hang out with the community, and I know that a lot of our officers really get some satisfaction from doing that, and I know that the community really enjoys going out to those. So we try and hold those as often as we can.
Good. I've enjoyed talking to you one-on-one right here, but we're just about out of time. So for the final question, I want to go back to our initial topic and ask you to give us one final piece of advice on protecting ourselves from ripoffs and scams.
Just learn to say no. If something is too good to be true, then don't fall for it. Just say no, and do your homework, do your due diligence, and try to minimize your chance of being taken advantage of.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you. And thank you for watching. I'm Starlene Stringer, and on our next show, we will have information to help you protect your pets. Our guest will be from Irving Animal Services, and that's coming up live on Thursday, February 9th at 1:30 p.m. So if you have questions, you can email them to ictn@cityofirving.org, and we'll get them answered on the next edition of Open Line. We'll see you then.